just wanna get high. Pass me the crowning. Now I just wanna get high. Pass me the crowning. I just wanna get high. Pass me the crowning. Yo, now I just wanna get high. Pass me the crowning. I just wanna get high. Pass me the crowning. I just wanna get high. Pass me the crowning.
Are you guys having a good time? Are you still alive out there since it's post 420? No? Well, good. That means you're high, and we like to hear that. How many of you guys love hash? Yeah! I love hash too.
Wanna hit the blunt? Do you wanna hit the gas? Hit the blunt, man. Hit the blunt one more time, yo. Hit the blunt one more time. Yeah. Hey, oh no, that's enough, baby. That's enough. Because he about to spaz now. Look, he high already. Look, he crying.
Hey, as president, we all gonna get high. 24/7. Yeah, we're gonna start 24/7, 420, no problem. Who wanna be high? President high, high!
I used to love when I would travel to other states, other countries, things like that, and people would ask you where you're from, and you would say, oh, I'm from Colorado. And they would say, oh, the mountains, the snow, the skiing, that's so beautiful. And I would say, yes, it is. And now anywhere I go, you say you're from Colorado, and they say, oh, that weed, how's that going for you?
When I grew up here, Pueblo was on all those top lists as one of the best places to raise a family in the country. But it was now just included as one of the top worst cities to live in America.
It's sad to watch my state become known as the drug state.
Colorado weed is famous.
The most concerning age group is going to be this one that's growing up right now, and once they become teenagers and they've only known this legalization era, and it's fed to them like it's normal, it's no big deal, it's nothing, and it's a huge deal. And the research we're just starting to understand as far as how this marijuana irreparably impacts the youth brains, that's scary. They can lose IQ points that they will never get back, and one of the biggest concerns is that this high potency marijuana that is now created, we have nothing to compare it to from the past. So all the people that say, you know, they grew up during Woodstock, they did it in high school or college and had no big consequences, this is a whole different animal.
It's not that you're talking about a slightly higher THC, you're talking about something that's not double, not triple, you're talking about a 10 and sometimes 20-fold increase in potency.
It is genetically modified and grown specifically for potency, and they've changed the whole dynamic of these plants. When I was a kid, it was not a big deal because it was only 2 to 3% THC, and then in the late 80s, early 90s, it rose to about 5 to 7%. In about 2001, 2002, here we saw it right around 10, 11%.
In Europe, THC content over 16% is considered a hard drug.
This is realistically a new drug. This is not, you know, we call it marijuana, and yes, it comes from the same plant, but this is not the plant you're thinking of when you're thinking of marijuana.
He said very proudly, I just had a product test out at like 30 to 33% in natural grown plant. And I'm telling you, 5 years ago, I was told by the marijuana industry, that's impossible.
A lot of that you've seen move from THC actual to THCA, which is tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. And theoretically, that's once it decarboxylates, you put flame to it or you touch it to a heated nail, that's what releases that carbon molecule and becomes THC.
Genetic modification is doing wonders. Then we extract it, superheat it, and we literally have what is referred to as the crack of marijuana.
You can get the marijuana concentrates, the wax, the dabs, the shatter, the BHO, the butane honey oil, and it's up to 98, 99% THC. And that is just a very dangerous drug.
Dabbing's been around for a while, but all of a sudden super high concentrated forms of marijuana resin, marijuana oils. That also coincided with vaporizers also becoming really popular. So now it wasn't just that they had to have a pipe in green leafy marijuana that was really strong smell, but they could carry around a little circle thing that had 200, 300 dabs of 95 to 100% THC. They'd go to the bathroom, they'd heat up the glass, dab it in oil, take a hit, and head back to class. Almost zero orders. What it caused is levels of people getting caught with it to go down, which makes it look like we're actually decreasing the amount of people using marijuana when it's not the case. It's just significantly harder to detect.
To a state that's considering it or a community that's considering it, I would tell them get the facts. One of the biggest drivers for all of these states is the money. Unfortunately, it's greed, right? It's really good people in leadership positions that are trying to do the best for their community. And they see this as a resource or a revenue generator that's going to help them better their community. And the fact of the matter is, if they really study those communities that have it, they will realize that there's not a whole lot of money. And the money that does come ends up being put back into the industry, either in the form of rehabbing your children who get hooked on it, or your adults that get hooked on it, or the increase in your law enforcement resources that you're going to have in your homeless population, in your hospitals, in your infrastructure, right? There's no money. And I think that's probably the biggest fallacy.
Last year, between recreational and medical marijuana, this state sold over $1.3 billion worth of dollars of marijuana. Or what did the state get? $157 million.
Everyone was really sold on the fact that it was going to create commerce and jobs and actually boost up the town's economy.
It was legalized in Colorado because they convinced people that the money from the taxes would go to schools. And it is earmarked, but the way they earmarked it is only to new construction of schools. So it can't go to teachers' salaries, it can't go to programs.
I'm in 80% of the state of Colorado in schools, even in rural areas, and I've yet to be in a school that's gotten a dime.
This was brought to us by outside interest, outside funding. They wrote it, they collected signatures on college campuses, and they sold a brilliant marketing campaign to voters who expected something completely different.
The only people I think that are making money off of this are the people in the industry.
There have been some politicians and legislators that have benefited, but the average citizen and the people living across the street from you have not.
The state of Illinois is looking at, we just want to solve our budget crisis, so we need the tax money to solve our budget crisis and we'll be good. Guess what? Colorado just went into special session to figure out the budget crisis. 5 years in, hasn't fixed or solved anything. None of the promises that were made ring true.
And I always ask the kids, is it easy for you to get marijuana or any drug? And they say yes. So they tell me it's easier to get than alcohol.
The industry said if you legalize it, you can keep it out of the hands of youths. That has not been the case.
It's a community issue, it's a national issue, and our children are hurting, and they're being literally, it's like the Pied Piper, they're being led astray right under our noses. And I think it's important to put a face to it. I think it's important to tell the truth. I think it's important to put it out there and be transparent and say, let's talk about this. And so that's my hope.
If you say yes to legalization of marijuana, then you say yes to more and future users, and those users are the youth of your community. The industry can't survive unless you create more users.
Oh, if you legalize it, we can regulate it. That'll get rid of the black market, and also will never get into the hands of kids. Well, I've had kids tell me you can walk right into some of these marijuana dispensaries, and especially the medical dispensaries that are not regulated by this state, and they get whatever they want out of the back door.
I promise you that the kids are using it. They're telling us in the emergency department that they're using it readily.
We are 55% higher than the national average currently. Colorado's still #1 in the nation for youth 12 to 17 years old, which we had never been before legalization occurred.
Anytime you increase accessibility, availability of any substance, and then they've convinced, and the data proves this out, they've convinced the youth that it's safer than alcohol, that it's not harmful.
I hear all the time, oh, but it's not heroin and no one's dying from pot. I'm like, really? that's the only option we have for our kids, it's heroin or pot, how about a drug-free childhood, and so kids develop their brains normally?
The other kids that get it, going, why would an adult ever do this to us? Why can't we change the law?
I just saw a study the other day that's up amongst youths of color, which was one of the reasons that they said they wanted to legalize it, because too many youths of color, minorities, were getting arrested for marijuana. Well, guess what? It's going up now, and it's legal. So absolutely nothing of what the marketing strategy, which was ingenious, quite frankly, none of their marketing strategy myths have come to fruition.
There's more marijuana dispensaries in Denver than there are Starbucks.
All the pot shops, for the most part, are in low-income neighborhoods.
They haven't put the shops in the places that are nicer to live in. So if you go up to Highlands Ranch or Lone Tree, Colorado, which are the more affluent areas, there's not a single marijuana shop there.
And what we'll see is a further divide in the social classes, is because they will put more and more substances in poor communities, marijuana and liquor stores, increases the amount of people that are left in that cycle of poverty, and it will have a further divide amongst poverty, and it will continue to divide amongst classes.
I always say the marijuana industry is selling addiction for profit, and our kids really get suckered into that, and they don't understand they're being preyed upon by a massive industry.
This is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
And I feel really passionate about, pulling the curtain back on that.
And it's a hard battle to fight as a parent when you have people much bigger saying it's not a big deal.
The marijuana industry is really good at, just like the tobacco industry and the alcohol industry is really good at marketing their product. And they're like, we don't market it to the youth. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's why you have Jolly Rancher edibles.
Why else would you make candy bars and cookies and all the things that we identify with our youth infused with marijuana?
I just saw a girl who ate the full bag of candies and had to go to the ICU. I mean, she had what's called a GCS of 3, meaning she was completely unresponsive. We couldn't wake her up no matter what we did, and she had to go to the ICU until several days later she woke up and could go home.
That's the way our children are viewed, is a paycheck.
It comes down to greed. People do not care about other people getting medicine or recreational marijuana. They care about money.
For them, it's money. They don't care, and that was the discussions we would have with my son is, you think they're going to be at your funeral if something happens? If something were to happen to you, will they be there? And...
Were they at your son's funeral?
No.
I mean, look at our industry that even has been set up to inspect this. Our Marijuana Enforcement Division, our oversight from Department of Revenue and Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, we've had inspectors in all of those divisions go and work for the marijuana industry, because they're getting sucked into the narrative and then saying, forget inspecting, I'm going in for the money. So what kind of standard do you have that you're holding to if your inspectors are going, heck yes, I'm all in?
Everyone can say that it doesn't matter what laws are in place as long as people are, doing it to themselves or not impacting others. But once it's starting to hit, our roadways and things like that, that impacts all of us.
Impairment is subjective to every human being. Even alcohol laws are subjective. But we finally lost enough kids on our roadways that Mothers Against Drunk Driving said enough, and were instrumental in forcing impairment standards. Well, that's not happening with pot.
For law enforcement, they've given us no bright lines to enforce it. So we are yet to have an instrument that measures intoxication.
You see people vaping in their cars. You don't know what's in the e-cigarette. We all know that THC cartridges are widely available to go in those things.
Do you want your bus drivers? Do you want your truck drivers? Do you want your doctors? Do you want these people high when they're operating on you or they're taking your kids back and forth to school?
When I go now and I ask them, how many of your friends think it's safer to drive with marijuana than alcohol? All the hands go up. And I don't care if I'm talking to freshmen, juniors, seniors, sophomore, whatever they are, hands go up.
When I see those numbers increasing and the number of drivers that were positive for marijuana involved in these traffic fatalities increased 66% just since legalization occurred in Colorado, that's definitely something of note that I pay attention to.
Our law enforcement officers are completely overwhelmed. I was speaking last Friday to our district attorney, and he said the only thing that legal pot has brought Colorado Springs is homicide. And he told me of case after case after case that he has worked on lately where it's a homicide case and individuals were killed because of fights over pot. And it's legal.
Doctors and ERs can tell you the true impact of how they're just overwhelmed with it. Talk to any of our EMTs or EMS. They're just inundated with the calls.
They're told not to speak out or they're going to lose their job.
I don't have a thing to gain by speaking out. The popular thing right now is to say marijuana is not harmless and we should legalize it. That's going to do nothing but help people. But that flies in the face of the evidence that we have right now, whether from a medical standpoint or a social legal standpoint. It is not going to be this panacea of cure-all that is being advertised across the country and really across the world right now.
There's no other substance that you can do recreationally that is also a medicine. If it's a medicine and it needs to be taken over and handled by pharmacies like a medicine. Where you get a prescription, you go to a pharmacy, they give you a pill and prescribed doses, and they do those things. If it's recreational, it's recreational. But you're sending a really poor message to kids that it's really good for them because it's a medicine that they can use recreationally, and that's confusing.
Part of the problem, the industry uses the word cannabis or marijuana interchangeably. So they talk about how wonderful cannabis is, it's so healthy. And the healthy part they're talking about is CBD. They're not talking about THC. So CBD, which is non-psychoactive, there are some studies showing there is some benefit. Still, it's pretty anecdotal. There are not really good, well-designed long-term studies on any of these things for anything.
For those legislators who are considering allowing CBD oil for children with seizures, there is so much that's missing in that narrative. And let me just start by saying there are products that are undergoing clinical trials with GW Pharmaceuticals in the U.S. To gain FDA approval for a pharmaceutical grade product that would withstand clinical trials. What we currently are doing in Colorado is not that. They are, again, artisanal products made by individuals who are not doctors, who are not pharmacists, who are not toxicologists. They're people who are in the marijuana industry.
So I think the jury is still out. My guess is that we'll further be able to define a specific subset of patients for whom it's beneficial. But there's likely another subset who's probably going to be made worse.
If you look at Children's Hospital Colorado website on how effective are cannabis-based products for seizures, they are showing still that EKGs are not showing a reduction in seizures like we're hearing publicized. Some children respond to it, some children don't. This seizure disorder, Dravet syndrome, kids have a tendency, their brain routes around whatever medication they're taking, so it's effective for a little while and then not.
I think some people truly believe that it's going to help them. And this is what the industry does.
And just always remember, a lot of things have changed, but one thing remains. Cannabis heals all wounded. And you are not alone.
Self-medicating is not the solution, and we've known that for hundreds of years. Why are we looking the other way and saying, oh, well, they have mental health issues, so they're self-medicating?
They go into the marijuana shops, and the marijuana shop employee is telling them to stop their medications and giving them the THC, and they come in with a little paper that says how much they should use and how often they should use it. It looks an awful lot like a prescription, and that they were told to stop taking their other medications.
What I see that's scarier to me is parents self-medicating their kids with ADHD and ADD because it decreases those things. They give their kids marijuana.
With PTSD, there isn't any research out there that shows it's beneficial.
We would have people come in treating their diabetes with marijuana, treating, just you name it, people were treating it with marijuana and stopping their normal medications until they wound up in the emergency department to see us.
We were testing on human subjects and just making these decisions on the fly.
Really, science should drive this. This is a health and safety issue. It is not a political issue.
Even at the risk of people giving me death threats, people telling me that I just was uninformed or hadn't read the literature. I spend the majority of my time doing this, and it's because I care about my patients. If you want to talk about cancer, There has been shown to be some studies that show it might have some anti-inflammatory or anti-tumor properties, but those are only in vitro studies. There's nothing in vivo that shows a benefit. It's so much so that the FDA recently came out and asked companies to stop advertising that because there's no literature to support that at all. And they've told them that they're no longer allowed to advertise something for which there's no actual research in.
But you're only going to get these people to agree about marijuana as medicine. You're only going to get these people to agree about marijuana as medicine. The coalition of senior citizens, of housewives and professionals and doctors and lawyers and nurses. Mm-hmm. You know, politics is illusions. Right. Shadows on the wall. It's pictures, it's photos, it's an AP wire. Right. And so I've not created an illusion, but I've articulated what marijuana, I've changed the face from a long-hair hippie to Hazel Rogers. Do it for 3.5 years and get away with it.
What I want to get across, cigarettes affect your lungs, that's in general. Alcohol affects your liver, as far as most people know. Marijuana affects your brain.
Changes the frontal lobe, drops the IQ by an average of 6 to 8 points, even in adults, and it does not return to normal. And there is a direct link between marijuana and mental illness, especially if you're predisposed, because we know that marijuana turns on the gene that carries mental illness. It's a COMP gene.
The younger you start use, and the more frequent you use it and the higher potency that you use, the more likely you are to start exhibiting psychosis.
So what are we going to, 10 years down the road, we're going to have a lot more schizophrenics? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense.
I started to notice how it affected me.
Kids will dab out, meaning they hit the high-end marijuana, and they black out. And they wake up 3 to 4 minutes later, they can't remember anything, they become extremely anxious, then they're terrified, then they become psychotic.
The common people would say that's somebody who's going crazy. That's what would be the common term for psychosis. But to put this into picture, this is somebody who the police are bringing in, they're screaming uncontrollably, usually about some sort of active hallucination they're having. They're requiring 4-point restraints, meaning they've got to be strapped down to the bed. They're spitting at you, they're screaming that somebody's coming to get them, that God has commanded them to do something. All of these just clear active hallucinations that would go with psychosis. They're clearly paranoid and they're clearly not in their right state of mind.
And so that's kind of what we're seeing on street corners and in parks and things, and people are kind of out of touch with reality.
We see that probably close to every other day in the emergency department, that somebody's coming in with that degree of psychosis. And the only thing found positive in a majority of their urine drug screens is cannabis.
I see addiction as a disorder of the learning and memory part of the brain. It's affecting the part of the brain where we learn to do everything. So everything we learn creates dopamine release in our brain, in the nucleus accumbens, which then reinforces memory about that, and then it gets hardwired into our brain. And we have this pathway on purpose because it helps us remember to eat, to procreate. I mean, it helps us to remember important things. And there is always this release of dopamine. Well, what happens is the addictive drugs work in the same pathway, only they cause an even more significant release of dopamine. And then they basically then hijack that part of the brain.
Not everybody that drinks a beer becomes an alcoholic, but the more people that drink, the more alcoholics there will be. And the same thing with marijuana is not everybody smokes marijuana becomes addictive, but the more people you introduce to marijuana will lead to more people that become addicted to it, both physically and chemically. And that's what I saw when it did become legalized.
I mean, I understand that it's difficult to make it in America today, it really is, but it's certainly even more difficult when you have an addiction and people are addicted to pot. I mean, I see it. And I don't see how people think that that can't happen.
The great lie of the marijuana industry is that marijuana is not addictive.
Marijuana is absolutely addictive. You know, it always takes me back to the old cigarette commercials that my dad used to joke about.
I have an old adage, you know, the first one's free and I have a customer for life.
Once THC got over 5%, that's when we saw the very first marijuana dependence syndrome diagnoses. It's actually in the DSM-5. People will say it's not addictive, and the medical industry doesn't respond to that much because they're like, it's in the DSM-5, of course it's addictive, we know that it is.
We discovered that there is a true withdrawal syndrome with marijuana. And the symptoms are basically anxiety, irritability, can't focus, can't concentrate, can't sleep, and this is where people get violent. They get very irritable because they don't have this substance that they've been addicted to.
We know that 1 in 4 youth get addicted. Now, if we were able to determine who that one was, that would help us. But what they're doing with the money, if you really follow the money in Colorado, they're utilizing a lot of the money for drug rehab programs. So we're just perpetuating this. So we legalize marijuana, and then we take our tax dollars that we're making off of marijuana to set up rehab facilities to get people off of marijuana. It's like a gerbil wheel.
Well, at the pregnancy center, we see women who are coming in early pregnancy. When we ask them if they use drugs, majority of them will tell us no, until we ask them, well, that includes marijuana. They're like, oh, yeah, I do marijuana. And they're like, oh, yeah, my doctor told me, or I hear it's good for nausea, or whatever. And so when we educate them and try to tell them about the effects on the baby, there's been some research showing that when a mother smokes marijuana while she is pregnant, that baby is born with more opioid receptors than a child whose mother didn't smoke.
If your mother was pregnant and using, then your brain is primed. And if you, as an adolescent, choose to use it, it's like hardwired in right away.
It attaches to the fat cells, so when you start breastfeeding, that's going to still affect the child. And we encourage them to talk to their doctor about a treatment plan so that if they get to the hospital and it shows that they've had drug use or issues like that at delivery, that they will have less of a chance of having their child taken away. And which is still a reality in Pueblo, in Colorado. Even though marijuana is legal, they can still have their children taken away as a result of that drug use.
Marijuana is safer than alcohol. It's not as bad for you as alcohol.
One of the things that was told to us is that when people have the choice between marijuana and alcohol, they're going to start going to marijuana because it's a natural substance, it's not as addictive as alcohol, and that use of alcohol will go down. Well, we have not found that to be the case in Colorado. We have some statistics in our report that show since legalization, Colorado's consumption of alcohol has actually increased each year. And there was a report that came out nationally a few months ago that said that Colorado was the #1 consumer for all drug substances in the nation. Colorado.
I think it truly is a gateway drug. And there's lots of research supporting that. I don't know why the industry wants to fight that. And then they'll say, well, tobacco is a gateway drug. And I say, absolutely, tobacco is a gateway drug. Alcohol is a gateway drug. It depends on whatever drug they use first. And the kids are tending to use marijuana first, more than tobacco, because we have done a really good job with education decreasing tobacco use.
One drug leads to another drug that leads to another drug, and before you know it, you're trying crap that you should not be trying.
I think it really boils down to a psychological predisposition to abuse. And if you will abuse one, there's a strong chance you'll abuse another, or anything that's, easier to get a hold of.
Is you're starting with kids that are 14 years old, and they're smoking the strongest marijuana that you can have. It's pure THC. There's nothing stronger. So what I see is kids start using Coracidin, they start using over-the-counter medication to enhance the highs. So marijuana in itself is already hallucinogen. If you take Coracidin with it, it makes it almost like LSD. Well, for the first time in my last year as a police officer, all of a sudden LSD is huge in schools again. If from coming from zero, never hearing kids talk about LSD, to all of a sudden I arrested a kid was selling LSD and everybody's talking about doing LSD. So all of a sudden you have this drug that was not there at all to being everywhere.
Most of the people I've treated who have had a problem with heroin or opiate addiction admit that they realize that marijuana leads them back to it. I've even had patients say they're really sad that they have to live in Colorado. I mean, they love Colorado. They don't want to leave Colorado, but there's dispensaries on every corner, and so their risk of relapse is very high, because if they smoke marijuana, they're going to be right back to using opiates.
One of the things I think that was most shocking to a lot of people in Colorado was this huge growth in the homeless population.
I couldn't believe it. On January 2nd, 2014, there was a line around the block to get into our agency for assistance.
Really, there's a couple different groups we're talking about. We have the homeless that are these chronically homeless individuals, whether it be for mental, financial, whatever reasons, and they can't get a job, they can't get a place to live. After legalization, we also saw this group that we more refer to as this transients or travelers.
We now refer to them as marijuana immigrants. Some like the term and claim it, some don't, but you will ask people what brought you to Colorado, because they go straight to social services to get food stamps and get medical and all that. And they say, I came here to smoke pot. There's no shame in it because it's legal here. So they're very proud of it and feel like they're a part of something awesome and wonderful.
And honestly, we just don't have enough housing for people. The people who are kind of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of resources now have even less. And it's just a very different group that's come in, very entitled, very difficult to work with. We've had to actually close down our supportive service center because I couldn't keep my staff safe anymore. And that just really breaks my heart.
There's been about a 100-time increase in the amount of transients that were here.
And they didn't have resources, they didn't have family, they didn't have support, but they came to either smoke weed, grow weed, or just be able to use it.
They were here to use legal marijuana, and they had no intention of getting a job.
Our motels in Pueblo are full. So you can't even use motels for emergency shelter because people are utilizing those for permanent housing year-round. So you have kids that are living with parents that smoke a lot of pot in very small spaces. So it's changed what we've been able to do for the people who need us the most.
The black market itself is here and thriving, because basically what they're doing is that they're hiding in plain sight. So we have a community that has invited the industry here through their leadership, and so black market people from outside the state have come here to set up shop and grow marijuana, whether it be legally or illegally, for the sole purpose of diverting it out of state.
If you're going to control, tax, and regulate a substance, you don't do two things to control it. Number one, you don't simultaneously allow home growth. The home grow becomes the black market. Because if you want people to go to a regulated location and use their ID and purchase and contribute to the tax coffers, you totally undercut that whole system by allowing home grow. We've also had all manner of international cartels move here, take over our gated communities, buy houses outright for cash, and set up mass grow operations in those homes.
Humboldt County has some of the highest violent crime rates in California. And it has to do with organized crime. And this is the little, the dark secret about marijuana. We've had East Coast crime families come in here. We've had Mexican mafia. We've had Asian gangs come in here. International gangs come here, buying property, leasing properties, and then growing marijuana so they can supply their suppliers on the East Coast, send it overseas. It's a huge deal. So people don't believe this myth that just because it's legalized that it's not going to become criminal anymore.
One of the other doctors I work with, she came from Detroit, and in downtown Detroit, she had never seen what she'd seen here in Pueblo. There was a full SWAT team across the street from her house that was taking down a big Cuban drug cartel that was marketing and selling marijuana.
The cartels have come into this area, and there are now, according to the Sheriff's Department, there are 5 key cartels in the Pueblo area that were not here before the legalization.
We know the cartels are bringing in heroin. We have issues with human trafficking.
We are supplying Mexican drug cartels with the best pot in the world.
There's a lot of marijuana that is leaving this state that goes out to other states.
The cartels come and trade our marijuana for their heroin.
You think of Colombia for a lot of the cocaine that reaches us. You think of Afghanistan sometimes for the poppy and the opium. Is Colorado, is the United States going to become the marijuana producers for the rest of the world? Is that what we really want?
Pueblo wants to be known as the pot capital of the world, and they seem to think that that's a really good idea. I don't. The cartels that are coming in are dangerous. We know somewhere this is going to turn into the little Laredo. And if you've ever been down to Laredo, it is a very scary place that you just don't stop.
No, it's terrifying, but it's something we never had to deal with before. So it's new, which is hopefully will give some clue to some other states that are considering it, that this is something you might have to look out for, and it's something you're going to be welcoming into your state if you're not careful. But the cartels they're perpetuating everything. They're infiltrating everything, and we've got these young kids that are joining these groups and these gangs, and they're getting involved, and they're selling, and they're transporting, and people go missing, and there's these burglaries. We just had a guy a couple days ago, a 70-something-year-old man that was just left to die in his house.
We point out in our report that all crime in the state of Colorado, when you're comparing the 4 years prior to legalization to the 4 years after, the 4 years prior, violent crime increased about 1.2%, and after it increased by about 20%.
The house across the street from us has been broken into several times. It's abandoned, and so it worries me about who's over there. What are they doing in that house? Are they watching our house? You know, we've had to buy a security system.
We really have this criminal element in the community that we didn't have before.
It's not just about marijuana. It has very little to do with the actual smoking of a plant. There's so much more that comes with it, with legalization, that most people don't ever contemplate.
And when you have somebody who is coming off a high and they need money and they're desperate and they don't have anything, if you think you won't get mugged, you're crazy. We had to have Cherry Creek Trail. There's needle dispensaries on our running trails because people were stepping on heroin needles. And Colorado is known to be, you know, this great outdoor hiking, healthy, you know, living. But we have to have needle boxes on our running trails.
4 cars a day are stolen in Pueblo. And it doesn't matter if your vehicle is locked. They will come in, they will jump in when you're sitting at the convenience store. If somebody runs in, you have to lock your doors because somebody will jump in next to you and carjack the vehicle.
What we're finding, unfortunately, is there is actually a very dark side to this industry that is tainting our waters, our soil, poisoning our wildlife, deforesting our forest. It wasn't until we had our animals that we were monitoring dying, and we basically did kind of like a reverse engineering, finding out what's going on, and then boom, found out that marijuana cultivations in these public lands, our national treasures, were contaminating their wildlife. You have to bear in mind that the growers are there from April, May, June, July, August, September, October, an average of 7 months. And an average of what we're finding is about 3 to 4 growers per grow site, because they're there the whole time. Now you take that site that's been there 6, 7 years, 4 people, 7 months. And now you're looking at years of living in one area. And when that campsite gets full of excrement nearby and food and trash, they'll move to another campsite. But that stays in place. There has not been one trespass grow where I've seen people clean up after themselves. And that's not my personal opinion, that's our scientific data. Now, the plot, you're in the forest, and you have a lot of timber, big trees, but those big trees are going to shade your marijuana plants. So what happens? Deforestation. So cutting these trees down, opening it up next to rivers and creeks. And so now you have a plant that is water thirsty. So now you have to irrigate it, which means dewatering creeks, pulling water away from salmon, pulling water away from cattle grazers out there and ranchers. About 50% of the waterways we've monitored have been positive for pesticide. When I say pesticides, it's a general category. When I say pesticides, I'm talking about fungicides, rodenticides, insecticides, molluscicides, herbicides, all of these these are all different layers, all compiled in what I'm just giving you a general category.
Because they're growing out in the hills that aren't designed, you know, to be farms. And then as soon as it rains, it pushes all of that soil amendments, all that perlite, everything that's in those soils into the creeks, which goes into the streams, which goes into the rivers and push out to the ocean.
They state upwards of 13,000 unpermitted grows within the county of Humboldt alone. Even if we say only 10% of those have the same snapshot, that's still 1,000 plus grows that have that footprint within one county of over 50 counties in California. The days of going out on my federal public lands alone are gone. I'm going to get in a world of trouble by running into an armed grower and getting killed out here. And that's what I decided not to take that risk. Our team now has to be accompanied by law enforcement to go in, to go collect scientific data on our public lands. What I don't want to have happen is researchers and scientists that are going to say, we told you so. Money is money, but water and land and these species on this earth, they're unique. And if we blink them out, we can't recuperate from it sometimes, or it's going to cost us whatever dollar you gain, it's going to cost us tenfold more to regain for the loss of natural resources.
They're damming up our creeks, they're building reservoirs, they're utilizing fertilizers and chemicals to make a better product in their minds.
The marijuana here is dirty. It is contaminated with pesticides, mold, fungus, bacteria, E. coli, salmonella. They're destroying it on a daily basis here. Well, they're trying to grow it so fast in this heated, humid environment. Of course, mold and spores are going to be all over it. The marijuana in this state, and even in Washington State and Oregon and California, found the same thing. The marijuana is highly contaminated today because of the way that they're growing it.
Real estate prices are up, houses sell quickly, but yet there's no housing for those that can't afford it. So we're kind of gentrifying a little bit.
A lot of the farm ground's being bought up, a lot of the housing's being bought up to grow the marijuana in.
They're buying a bunch of houses, they're using the whole house for grows, then they're shipping that out of state. You have a bunch of parents growing inside their house. They can have unlimited dry product. So from a law enforcement perspective, there's almost zero way to regulate it.
And you can't regulate that. That's somebody's house. And so it becomes an issue. We only know about it when there's these huge busts with 200, 300, 400 plants.
That actually then ruins the entire neighborhood. You now no longer have your kids out there playing in the street because you're worried about the clientele that's coming by.
I don't ever remember finding a hypodermic needle when I was a kid at a playground, hiking, walking around in parks or in areas within the town I grew up in. Our youngest, at 3 years of age, discovered a hypodermic needle in the park that she plays in. Luckily, she didn't interact with it, saw it, I removed her from that situation. But to then say afterwards, I am going to now teach my child what is a hypodermic needle. This is something that I would expect, like maybe somebody in a war-torn country to say, don't touch that, that could be a landmine. Don't touch that, that could be a booby trap in a war-torn country. Now I'm teaching my child to avoid hypodermic needles. That is concerning to me. Is that something that we're comfortable with as a society? I hope not. I'm not comfortable with that.
So this is a place that was busted twice as a grow site. The first time it was Cuban nationals who were growing it in this house and taking it to Florida to sell. And there were 3 industrial air conditioners that were visible. Oh, and there were these huge industrial vents coming out of the windows in the basement. And we wondered, why would somebody need all that? So clearly, there's something going on here. Well, finally, I come home one day and there are police cars everywhere. And I said, oh my God, what are you doing? Well, they're waiting on a warrant. They're going to bust the place. And the way they decided to bust it was the electricity company came out to read the meter and found that they bypassed the meter. And of course, that caused them to call the police because these people were stealing electricity. And so the police came out here. But now it's trash, and who's going to do anything about it? And what's kind of sad is it was a really lovely older couple who lived here for many, many years, and then they both died. And of course, then the house goes on the market.
That's a water pump. and then they attach the hose. They obviously put the water pump in the bush here to conceal it. There's the pump, and you follow it down, and they were bringing in the water from the back here. You can come across stories like this everywhere across Colorado.
Yeah.
I mean, here, DEA SWAT team showing up at this house. It's like your neighbors are cartels.
Yeah, right.
Our Main Street and our downtown areas are not adding more companies.
Good doctors are leaving, and it's hard to attract people back to a place to say, hey, we have all of these marijuana migrants here, we have a huge drug problem here, would you like to move here with your family and provide medical care to them? Obviously the answer is, well, I'm going to look around.
10 years ago, I could go on the state website and I could see how many workplace accidents and injuries happened in our state that were drug and alcohol related. And so we could say to employers, here is a real number that we can measure, and we can see this is how much this costs your business, because we know the average cost of a work comp claim, all of that. Guess what? Not only has that data disappeared from the Colorado State website since 2012, but we don't even now track it.
People are being fired for going to work high, and they bring their medical marijuana card and claim they're medicating.
We try to relate it back to alcohol, saying, well, you can't come in drunk. And they say, oh yeah, but it's not the same. To me as an employer, it's the exact same. You're still under the influence of a substance.
Positive drug tests in the workplace have tripled according to the national average. And all illicit drugs have gone up according to the Quest Diagnostics Drug Test Index, which they do annually. And it's the first time we've seen an increase in all illicit drug use in the workplace in over a decade.
We actually have our insurance carriers who are also at the forefront of this new subject. They don't really know exactly how to handle it, but what they are doing is they're putting everyone into higher risk categories should you have any sort of incident where you had anyone under the influence of marijuana. Now Colorado, I believe, will be looked at as a higher risk state.
But then that employer is going to assume all of that liability and responsibility on increased accidents, injuries, absenteeism, employee turnover, the wide variety of things. And it takes a lot of education, and we don't have any good central way of letting business owners know that this is going to impact you financially. The U.S. loses over $246 billion a year on employee drug and alcohol use.
These kids are confused these days, so they have conversations all the time with their parents, with the school systems, with their friends. As an employer, I will not hire those kids that are smoking weed. And the kids, a lot of my friends' kids, a lot of the kids in the community, we know who smokes weed, we know who doesn't smoke weed. So the cold hard truth is, society now has put them in a lower category, whether they like it or not, and whether they understand it or not. You have issues that we don't want to deal with.
Well, our governor is always speaking out about marijuana. He says, oh, it's a social experiment. He kind of chuckles, and he never really comes out against it. Because when he was losing in the election, he had a huge fundraiser by the marijuana industry. Made millions of dollars. You can just Google it.
Politicians willing to throw away lives for money.
Literally, the youth, the citizens of Colorado and all the other legalized states are being experimented on. And Governor Hickenlooper will say, let the experiment continue.
Our governor said it's a great social experiment, an experiment put into play by people who didn't establish any guidelines for that experiment. When you experiment, you have criteria, you have guidelines, you have data, and you track the data to see if it's successful or not successful. And we continue to get from our governor's office, well, we can't tell you the cost, we don't know.
We're figuring this out as we go, as people and their lives are really impacted by it.
The studies are very clear. This experiment has not worked.
The generation right now is the experiment.
Marijuana is nothing more than tobacco 2.0. If you want to know what's going to happen with the marijuana industry in the United States, go back and look at tobacco at the turn of the century. From the turn of the century to the 80s.
Almost no one smokes anymore because of the education that has come out. If we just had that before this happened.
Do the research yourself. Don't trust me. Do the research yourself. Independent research, look at it.
We can't just throw a bunch of volunteer people at a project and give them an hour a year or a semester and then say, well, that prevention failed.
The biggest way to prevent is education.
The numbers dropped and dropped and dropped in 20 years of prevention, and now they're on the increase. Is that the direction that we want to go in?
We lost the war on drugs, so let's legalize it. Well, we haven't lost the war on murder, right? We haven't eradicated murder, but it's still illegal, right? That's just a silly argument. Yes, did we eradicate marijuana? No, absolutely not. But we did keep it to a maintenance level in a community. And that segued with our moral compass of society. And I think that's what nobody's talking about. When you normalize this type of behavior, you accept the byproducts of what happens.
Switzerland has 1 to 2% youth drug use in schools. 1 to 2%. And guess what? They're concerned about that. They want it lower. Whereas in Colorado, we're looking at over 20% of youth drug use in our high schools. And these folks come over here to see what we're doing, and they can't even comprehend that we're okay with that.
This is not your grandpa's weed. This is not our weed from the 80s. This is a drug.
It's the Trojan horse that's imploding America.
We're creating a monster that we already can't control.
It will weaken our nation, weaken our workforce, weaken our students, our educational system, our ability to move forward and be on the world stage. It's going to devastate our nation if we don't get this turned around very quickly.
I speak out for two primary reasons. One is I just feel like there's a moral obligation, and because most everyone else I know is afraid to do so. And so if all of us are quiet, what's going to happen?
If we give up, we're complicit. And I will not be complicit in destroying the young people of our nation, or the old people for that matter.
I have been accused of being hired by the pharmaceutical companies. I'm like, can you send me a check? Because I'm broke. I work 7 days a week to pay for my son's recovery.
Nobody deserves to be ignored. And if we give up, we become complicit in this movement and just say, you know, I'm going to look the other way, or it's really okay with me. I won't be that person. And so maybe there's 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 of me against thousands, but you know what? The truth will bear out. I believe that.
We are speaking out. It's very hard to continue to speak out when you're beat down by a group that has the money.
I would say both as a sheriff and a citizen that our community is worse off for this. And I've said it from the beginning. This is not new. I was one of the first ones that came up and said, look, in 10 to 15 years, we are going to regret having done this.
We are the Wild West of pot, and there are a lot of unintended consequences that came along with legalization, and so we are really a cautionary tale for others.
A lot of homelessness, a lot of crime, and a lot of drug addicts who prefer being high to life.
It affects all of us.
If it comes, then be prepared what comes with it.
Thank you.